Hello guys, how are you doing? I hope you are doing very well. Guys, today we're going to talk about friction, air resistance, water resistance, and upthrust. So what are these things and what is upthrust? I think upthrust is kind of new thing for you. So let's start from the friction. Bismillah. Friction is a force between two surfaces trying to slide past each other. It means we must have two surfaces. Without two surfaces, we don't have friction. If it's only one, there is no friction. If, for example, there is no friction here, because we don't have two surfaces move on each other. It said two surfaces trying to slide past each other. Like what? Like this box or this object, whatever it is, that moves on the ground. So there is a friction between the box and the ground because two surfaces move on each other. It means we can say sometimes that both two surfaces are going to move on each other. Sometimes one of them will move the other one on the other one. So when two surfaces trying to slide past each other, there's going to be friction. And we have some points about friction that you have to know. Friction acts on moving object. It means without movement, there is no friction. If we stop pushing this box, there is no friction. We must push the box to move because we need moving for friction. Without movement, there is no friction. And the movement also has rule. It must move on another surface. For example, this is moving, right? But it's not on another surface. So there is no friction here. And friction is always worked in opposite direction. For example, when we push the box to right side, friction is for left. The friction force is for left side. If we push this to left side, the friction is for right. It's always opposite. If we push it for up, the friction is for down. If we push for down, the friction is for up. So it's like that. And friction is always slows things down. It means if we remove friction force here, we can push it faster. But because of friction, it will be a little slower. And also, friction can increase by the roughness. If it's rougher, I mean the surface is rougher, so the friction will be more. If it's smoother, it's gonna be less. So there is friction, but the amount is different. When two surfaces move on each other, 100% we have friction, but the amount is different. The amount of movement on each other is different. How rough it is, it's different. So this is going to change the friction. So friction is two surfaces trying to slide past each other, and friction acts on moving object, only moving object, and it works in opposite direction, and also it slows things down. So this is all about friction. Let's see what about air resistance. It's so easy, guys. Air resistance is a force that slows things down, like friction slows things down, but when down that move, I mean slow things down when they move through air. For example, this is moving through air, right? But it's gonna go down slowly. Why? Because they are moving through air, so air resistance will make them slower, will make this slower. So it's a force that slows things down when they move through air. When you are running, air resistance makes you slower, but amount of air resistance is different. If the air resistance is more, you will be very slow. If it's less, you will be slower, but not too much, like that. Air resistance affects all moving object. For air resistance too, we must have moving object. Without moving, there is no air resistance. For friction too, without moving, there is no friction. Without moving, there is no air resistance. Sorry. Okay. And also, we said the roughness is going to talk about the friction. I mean, it's all about the friction is going to be depend on the roughness, how rough it is. But what about air resistance? We said if it's rough, the surface is rough, the friction is more. I mean, the object will be slower. When friction is more, the object will be slower. So it's going to be very slow. What about air resistance? What is going to make the air resistance more? I mean, the object will be slower than what it is. The large surface area has more air resistance than smaller surface. If we make this parachute smaller, this one is going to be faster. Why? Because the surface of the air resistance, you see, the air resistance push it up continuously. So that's why the air resistance is pushed up to, so the surface is more air resistance pushed up, that's why it's gonna be slower. If you make it smaller, the surface, this surface, make it smaller like this, so it means less air resistance, it's gonna be faster. Not fast, very fast, but I mean faster than this. And in here, guys, when we say air resistance, it means we must have air to resist you, to slows you down, to slow the object down. For example, in here we have air resistance. With air, you see, this one has a larger surface, it's gonna be slower than the smaller surface. Sorry. So in here, there's no air, so the surface is not important. Why? Because there is no air. In here, because the surface is more air resistance is gonna push it up, so it's gonna be slower. But in here, there's no air, nothing is gonna affect on these two, so they are gonna arrive at the same time. When air exists, when there's, air does not exist. In here, the air does not exist. There again, there is no force to push them. But in here, we have air resistance. We said larger surface has more air resistance. So this one, the surface of this one is more than this one. So that's why this one has more air resistance and it will be slower. That's what friction is and what air resistance is. Let's go for the water resistance and upthrust. Yalla, bismillah. Water resistance is exactly, guys, like air resistance. We said is a force that slows things down, right? Down, moving through what? In air resistance, we said is a force that slows things down that move through air. But in here, because it's water resistance, it's not air resistance, we say the slow things down when they are moving through water. So that's the difference. The only difference is this: air resistance and water resistance, both of them are going to slow things down. But when air resistance, when object moves through air, water resistance when object moves through water. That's the difference. Air resistance is the force that slows things down when they are moving through air, and water resistance is the force that slows things down when they are moving through water. And water resistance works on moving objects, so when they are moving through water. So the same friction, air resistance, water resistance, for all of them, we need moving objects. They must move. Without moving, there is no air resistance, water resistance, and friction. When they are moving, this resistance is going to appear. It's going to resist them of moving. Okay, they don't let them to move. They are trying to stop them. So in here, the same like air resistance. Larger surface has more air resistance. Larger surface has more water resistance too. So of course, because more water is gonna push it back. When something moves through water, if it's the surface is less, it can be faster because less water is gonna push it back. But if the surface is more water is gonna push it back. More water is gonna resist it. So when the surface is more, the resistance will be more. If you can see the board here, why? Because of the air resistance is gonna make it slower. And guys, sometimes the people that when they are swimming, and also the fish is like here, you see it's streamlined shape to reduce water resistance. They are using this shape. The name of this shape is, this fish shape is streamlined shape. What does it mean? This one is a name of the shape. And why? Because during having this shape, your surface is smaller. We say larger surface has more air resistance, so you will reduce your surface by this one. When surface is going to be smaller, air resistance and water resistance will be smaller, right? Will be less. So by streamlined shape, you will reduce water resistance. Why? Because you will make your surface smaller. That's what air resistance, water resistance, and friction. And there is something that we just mentioned. It's upthrust. There is something new. When you push things down, but on water, but it's not gonna go down. Why? Because something is gonna push it up. What is this pushing up? Upthrust. It's a force that the force in water that pushed objects up, whatever it is, not only the ball. So upthrust is a force in water that pushed objects upward. Okay, when you push it down, and the upthrust is gonna push it up. Every time, wherever it is, even if it's inside the water or on the water, it has upthrust. There is, but amount of upthrust is different. If the amount of upthrust is more, it's not gonna, it doesn't let it to sink. If it is less, so the object will sink, but it has upthrust. But it's gonna sink, but it has upthrust too. But because the upthrust is not much, that's why it's gonna sink. If the upthrust is more, it's not gonna sink. It's gonna float like this. It's not gonna float. Why? Because the amount of upthrust is too much. So that's why it's not gonna. It push it up continuously, and it's very strongly. It's gonna push it up because the upthrust is more. The force is more for pushing up. It's gonna push it up. Doesn't let it to. Doesn't let the object to sink. So sorry, that's all about friction, which is the two surfaces trying to slide past each other like here, and they're acting on friction is only act on the moving object, is work in opposite direction. We said when the object move, friction is for the other side. It slow things down, and air resistance is the force that slow things down when they're moving through air. It means the thing must move through air. In here, guys, we have friction, but we have air resistance too, because we have air around it, right? We have air. So we have friction and air resistance, both of them in opposite direction. Air resistance too. When you push something, air resistance is gonna resist it. It's gonna push it back. Like friction. Both of them will be for the left side. Because the object is moved for right, the friction and air resistance is gonna go for left. And larger surface has more air resistance, of course. And water resistance is also the force that slows things down when they are moving through water. If the surface is larger, water resistance will be more. And for air resistance, water resistance, friction, we must have moving object. If the object is not moving, there is no friction and air resistance and water resistance. And streamline shape is a type of the shape that reduce your surface. So by this way, your surface will be smaller and the water resistance will be smaller. You can swim faster. Upthrust is the force that by water that pushes objects upward. It's gonna push everything upward, so that's upthrust. That was all the lesson about friction, air resistance, water resistance, and upthrust. And I hope you understand everything. Best wishes.